So for the front of the car, I had the subframe removed, sandblasted and powder coated, white line front sway bars, and had all of the suspension components refinished. The lower control arm was also sandblasted and powder coated. The upper arm was also sandblasted and powder coated. The kingpins, bearings, seals were all replaced. The hub was vapor honed. The axles were fully rebuilt with OEM boots, brand new wheel bearings, seals, down to the axle nuts and cotter pins. Essentially, any hardware that I can get new, I went ahead and just got brand new. The TC rods were another brand, so I got SPL TC rods. So now I have the entire catalog. The lower ball joints on the inner and outer were also replaced. The steering rack was also overhauled. The inner tie rods were replaced. The pinion gears on the rack assembly, as well as the worm gear and all of the gaskets for the steering components were replaced as well. And here I have the spoon rigid collars installed on the front subframe. If you're not familiar with what rigid collars do, I highly recommend spending the time and just looking at the performance benefit. But the short version is that they square your subframe so that it is true. And the last component that was installed is the Cusco TC rod brace. While we were in there, I made the decision to overhaul the current oil cooler setup. I had a Greddy 13 or 18 row, which was a tube and fin style, and we upgraded to a larger modern core, which is a bar and plate style, and I think it's a 32 row. The thought process behind this was to have the oil cooler as close to the oiling side as possible, running shorter lines and not having it run across. For the buy it off the shelf type customers, it totally makes sense to get it and have it installed on the other side because the blow off valve is on the driver's side. But since I'm doing everything custom, we felt it was best to move the blow off valve to the other side and then have the oil cooler closer to the oil areas on the engine. We also got rid of the OEM oil cooler setup that is a part of the RB in its stock form, which cleared up a lot of space and replaced it with a Tarx oil plate. I mounted the oil filter on the bottom of the car. This way I can get a larger filter, and also when I do an oil change, any oil dripping down is going to be a lot more manageable than the Greddy kit, which is kind of angled up and actually spills every single time you do an oil change. We also took the liberty of updating the power steering cooler unit and got a beefier one similar to the oil cooler. I also upgraded my intercooler to a Hypertune core with billet end tanks. These end tanks have a tight radius bend, which is going to make it very tight and give me as much space as possible. I will go with all Wiggins clamps in the future, but I have to upgrade my intake manifold and drive-by-wire throttle body, but that will be in the next phases. So under the hood, I have a modified S14 V8 radiator. The reason I went with this is because it is a almost plug and play dual pass radiator. The R32 GTR radiator is only like a 46 mil thick core, whereas this is like a 53 mil, and everything else is almost plug and play. All we had to do was chop off the top of the fill. We flipped it around so that the overflow nipple is pointed in the other direction and welded that on. The OEM radiator hose could almost be retained. You just need to extend it slightly, but we decided to just make our own aluminum piping with the silicone hose on the ends, which I felt was nicer. With a little bit of effort, you could also retain the clutch fan. I just think that E-fans are great, but if you don't have to run them due to space constraints, the clutch fan is never going to fail you because it's always going to work. The OEM shroud just needs a little bit of trimming, but it does plug onto this radiator as well. So that's a huge benefit for running this radiator setup. And just a neat thing here is the flip up positive terminal cover. The 32 GTR one is fixed and it doesn't flip up. So I've included the part number information here in case you are interested in getting this. I also had the oil pan upgraded. We vapor honed the sump and then installed the Leask Spec extended sump. And I also upgraded from the Tomei baffle to the Nismo baffle. The reason I think the Nismo baffles are better is because the metal gates on the unit, whereas the Tomei just has little rubber doors. And to wrap up the head components, I got the cam splash plates from BoostDoc, which I was the first to do, and he only made the one plate for the rear section. I asked him why not all three, and that kind of evolved to the single long splash plate that is being sold by Hypertune and BoostDoc today. I also got the PRP dual head drain on the back of the head. I know these photos also show the blue billet valve covers. I ran those for a few months, but I was just getting a lot of blow by, and I don't want to blame the valve covers just because I'm trying to chase down other issues. I decided to go back to the OEM valve covers, which actually has the mine style baffles in them. So I got new foam for the baffles, had the valve covers vapor honed and then powder coated a special color, and then I'm going to run the OEM ones for now until I get the blow by issue under wraps. And lastly, the Nitto Billet oil pump, and that really wraps up all of the engine and front end stuff that I did.